For a long time, the British acting world was all about the stiff upper lip and maintaining a perfect public image, especially during a time when being yourself could actually land you in prison. Many of the greatest actors to ever grace the London stage or the silver screen lived double lives, tucked away behind marriages of convenience or quiet country homes, waiting for a time that never seemed to come. It is a bit sad to think about how much energy they had to spend hiding who they were while they were busy entertaining the world. And today we're going to look at 15 of these legends who were secretly gay or bisexual during the height of their fame. We have to start with Sir John Gielgud, who was basically the king of the British stage. He was part of that legendary trio with Olivier and Richardson, but in 1953, he was involved in a huge scandal that almost ended his career. He was arrested for importuning in a public toilet, which was a common way the police trapped gay men back then. He was so terrified that he would lose his knighthood and never work again that he considered taking his own life. He had just been honored by the Queen, and suddenly he was being treated like a common criminal. When the news broke, he arrived at the theater expecting boos, but instead, the audience gave him a massive standing ovation before he even said a word. It was a rare moment where the public showed they cared more about his talent than his private life. Later in life, he found a long-term partner in Martin Hensler, a man he lived with for 40 years, but for a long time, Martin was just the friend who lived at the house. Gielgud was once asked why he never came out publicly, and he simply said that in his day, it just was not done. Then there is Dirk Bogarde, who was the ultimate matinee idol. He was known as the idol of the audience, and women absolutely adored him, sending him thousands of love letters every week. He lived for 40 years with his partner and manager, Anthony Forwood, but he never officially came out. He went to great lengths to protect his image, even buying a secluded house in France so they could live together without the British press snooping around. He eventually took a massive risk by starring in the movie Victim, which was the first British film to even mention the word homosexual in a serious way. He knew that taking the role could ruin his career, but he felt he had to do it. Even then, he called Anthony his secretary or his shadow in public, and he famously burned many of his private letters and diaries before he died to ensure his secrets remained safe. Sir Alec Guinness, the man we all know as Obi-Wan Kenobi, had a much more complicated relationship with his identity. He was a deeply private man who converted to Catholicism in his 40s, largely as a way to find some kind of peace with his attractions, which he felt were a moral failure. His private diaries are full of self-doubt and stories of him walking the streets of London at night, feeling a deep sense of guilt and looking for some kind of connection that he felt he was not allowed to have. He once wrote about an encounter in a public park that left him so shaken with shame that he went straight to a priest for confession. He was married for a lifetime and was very loyal to his wife, Marilla, but his inner life was a constant battle between his faith and his true self. This internal struggle gave his performances a layer of mystery and a sense of holding something back that made him one of the best actors in history. Charles Laughton was another giant who struggled with his secrets. He was married to the actress Elsa Lanchester, and he actually broke down and told her the truth about his sexuality very early in their marriage. She was shocked but decided to stay with him, and they lived as companions and intellectual partners for decades. Laughton often felt like an outsider because he did not fit the handsome leading man mold, and he often called himself a monstrous man, which was a mix of his feelings about his weight and his sexuality. He would often lose himself in his roles to forget who he was, and his home life was quiet and shielded. He was known to be very sensitive and would sometimes cry on set if he felt he was being judged. Then we have a tragic case of Kenneth Williams, the star of the Carry On movies. He was one of the funniest men in Britain, known for his nasal voice and high camp humor, but his private diaries revealed a man who was incredibly lonely and often disgusted by his own nature. He had a deep fear of intimacy and lived a very solitary life, never finding a long-term partner because he could not reconcile his public fame with his private desires. He lived in a small, obsessively clean apartment with his mother, Louie, who was the only person he ever truly loved. He spent his nights writing about his sadness and his health problems, and his humor often felt like a shield he used to keep the world at a distance. He once wrote that the physical act of love was repulsive to him, which many think was his way of dealing with the fact that he could never have the life he really wanted. Jeremy Brett, whom many consider the definitive Sherlock Holmes, was another actor who lived a complex life. He was bisexual and had a very deep, long-term relationship with another man named Gary Bond after his marriage to actress Anna Massey ended. He struggled with bipolar disorder, and the pressure of maintaining his image while playing such an intense character often took a toll on his mental health. When journalists would visit him at home to talk about his bachelor life as Holmes, he would have to hide Gary's things and pretend he lived alone. He was a man of great passion who felt things very deeply, and he remained a dedicated and brilliant performer even as he dealt with his private demons. Sir Michael Redgrave, part of the famous Redgrave acting dynasty, was quite open with his family about his bisexuality. He even wrote a letter to his son, Corin, to explain that there were different ways to love and that he should not be ashamed of his father. He had several long-term male lovers while remaining married to Rachel Kempson, and they had a sort of understanding that allowed him to be himself within the walls of their home. However, to the fans, he was the perfect family man and a serious dramatic actor. The press actually knew about his life, but respected him so much that they never printed the stories, which was a rare kind of protection in those days. Denholm Elliott was another actor who lived this way. He was bisexual and had a very open marriage with his wife, Susan Robinson. They were part of a very artistic, bohemian circle in Ibiza, where his sexuality was not a scandal. He was known as the actor's actor because he could play any role with total honesty. He worked right up until he passed away from AIDS-related complications in 1992, and his wife later wrote a beautiful book about their life together, showing that despite the secrets, they had a very real and loving partnership. Noel Coward, the master of wit and style, was someone everyone knew was gay, but he never made a formal announcement. He lived a life of luxury and had many famous friends, and he used his clever writing to drop hints about his life without ever getting in trouble with the law. He lived with his partner Graham Payne for many years, and they were a very stable and happy couple. Coward was the definition of cool, and he managed to stay popular through several decades where the laws were very harsh, mostly because he was so charming that nobody wanted to be the one to knock him down. Frankie Howard was a beloved comedian who lived in constant fear of being outed. He had a partner named Dennis Haymare, who also acted as his manager for over 30 years. Howard reportedly faced several blackmail attempts because of his sexuality, which made him very paranoid and anxious. He even had a physical breakdown at one point because the stress of hiding was too much to handle. He used his nervous, stuttering stage persona to deal with his real-life anxiety, making millions laugh while he was personally terrified that one wrong move could ruin everything. Dennis remained his rock through all the highs and lows, but they could never be seen as a couple in public. Sir Ian McKellen is a different case because he eventually became the face of coming out. But for the first half of his career, he was a closeted Shakespearean actor who feared that honesty would end his career. He did not come out until 1988, when he was nearly 50, specifically to fight against a law called Section 28 that targeted gay people. He has said that his acting actually improved once he stopped lying about who he was, because he did not have to use all that energy to hide his true self. Sir Derek Jacobi, another titan of the stage and screen, also lived quietly for many years before being able to be open about his long-term partner, Richard Clifford, whom he eventually married. He represents that generation that lived through the change in the law and finally got to step into the light with his head held high. Nigel Hawthorne, famous for Yes Minister, was accidentally outed by a journalist right before the Oscars in the 1990s. He was a very private man who had been with his partner Trevor Bentham for decades, and the sudden public attention was incredibly stressful for him at such a late stage in his life. He was worried it would cost him the Oscar, but he handled the situation with a lot of dignity and became an accidental hero for many people. Robert Stevens, who was once considered the heir to Laurence Olivier, had a very tumultuous life and was bisexual, which often led to tension in his high-profile marriages. He was a brilliant but erratic genius who felt the weight of expectations his whole life and struggled to find a balance between his public career and his private needs. He was known for his incredible voice and his drinking, which many felt was his way of numbing the pain of living such a fragmented life. Finally, Simon Callow was one of the first major British actors to be truly open about his life in the 1980s. He wrote a book called Being an Actor that broke the silence and paved the way for everyone who came after him. He spoke with total honesty about his relationships and his life, helping to end the era of secret lives and showing that you could be a respected, successful actor without having to hide who you loved. It is important to remember these men not just for the secrets they kept, but for the incredible work they did despite the pressure they were under. They had to be masters of disguise both on and off the stage, and while it is a relief that actors today do not have to hide like that, we owe a lot to these pioneers who paved the way. They showed that talent has nothing to do with who you love, and their legacy still shapes the way we watch movies and plays today.